It was almost real, the Pro Wrestling History Podcast, episode 98. Hello and welcome to this episode of It Was Almost Real, the Pro Wrestling History Podcast. My name is Ken Zimmerman Jr., and this is the podcast dedicated to the history of professional wrestling between the 1860s and 1930. And in this episode, I'm going to discuss a possible double cross in 1916. But first, I have had the opportunity over the last week or two to start getting caught up on One Fighting Championship, which is the MMA promotion that comes out of Singapore mainly, but China and Thailand as well. It's not strictly MMA, it's a mix of MMA, Muay Thai, kickboxing, some grappling, no-gi grappling. The show is normally a mix of these different disciplines. So in this particular card, I watched the One Fight Night from 33, which actually I was intending to watch an earlier one and accidentally clicked on this one. One of the fights on there was a good example of the danger of going for submissions to the point of exhaustion. So if you've not seen the card and you want to see the card, then skip over this because obviously it's going to have a spoiler or two in it. But the fight was between Ibrahim Dayuev, who is a really fantastic wrestler, and Pedro Dantas, who is a really, really skilled Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. They lock up. Of course, Dayuev wants to take him to the ground, and Dantas immediately secures a triangle choke, and he's going back and forth between the triangle choke and an armbar. And he is close on a submission a couple of times, but Dayuev manages to defend just enough to keep his airway open and not allow Dantas to get a hold of his arm for an armbar. And I'm watching this, and they're like 2 minutes in with this triangle locked on, and I'm sitting there thinking, if he doesn't tap him pretty quickly, his legs are going to be completely burnt. He wasn't able to tap him. And then Dayuev pretty much dominated the rest of that round because Dantas is on his back. They get into the second round, and Dantas is able to secure an anaconda choke. He's trying very hard for the submission, and he looks like he's getting close a couple times, but Dayuev is smart enough to keep his legs back and not let him really crank this anaconda choke, and eventually he gets out of it. So now Dantas, not only his legs are burnt out, but his arms are burnt out for trying this anaconda choke for a couple of minutes. So Dayuev won a pretty easy decision in the match. And I love submissions. I've said before, one of my favorite parts of judo and jiu-jitsu is submissions. The challenge is, if you put everything you have into that submission and you exhaust yourself and you don't get it, you're a sitting duck for the person that you're fighting. So in this respect, once he burned out, he was easy pickings for Dayuev. I've always said that, you don't want to give up position for submission because in most MMA fights, if you're underneath, they're considering you losing. And a lot of times, if you go for these arm bars or a triangle or a guillotine and you don't get it and that opponent is on top of you, now you are going to be trying to come back from a very, very bad position. And a lot of times it doesn't work out too well for you. So you get a chance, that's a good fight. But I recommend you don't have to watch every fight. I normally don't either. I'll skip to the ones that I'm interested in. But it is interesting every once in a while to watch a kickboxing match or a Muay Thai fight or the no-gi grappling matches they have on there as well. For the update this week, I had Seeing that the UFC had signed a new deal with Paramount Plus to move from ESPN Plus to Paramount Plus and to get out of the pay-per-view business. I was pretty happy about that. I don't think I'm all of the sudden, because I tapped out on UFC about a good year ago, because the fights were all getting to be kickboxing matches. I don't really want to watch a kickboxing match between two Brazilian Jiu Jitsu black belts, but that's what most of the fights were becoming, because all fights, or I'm sorry, all styles, all fighting styles morph to adapt to the rules of the competitions if they're primarily a competitive art. Judo, when it first started, the practitioners of judo were just as skilled on the ground as any Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt of today. But the rules so favored throws and throwing a person for ippon that now 80% of judo practice is standing and doing throws, because it adapted to the rule set and what was rewarded in competition. You had the same thing in MMA. The bonuses in that tend to go to the fights that are the most exciting, which means people standing and trading. The wrestler that just takes somebody down and mugs them for 15 minutes, that's a dominating performance, but they rarely get a bonus because a lot of people don't understand grappling, particularly the casual fan, and they don't find that particularly exciting. And I have to admit, there are some fights where a guy is just on top, wearing the guy like a blanket. Kamaru Usman used to do this. Khamzat Chimaev does this today. But I can see what they're doing, and that to me is interesting because they are so dominant. But if you get two big heavyweights and one is just laying on the other one because they're both exhausted, that is a boring fight. For most fans, they can't even tell the difference between those two scenarios. I am probably going to watch when UFC goes to Paramount Plus. I already have Paramount Plus. I used to be an ESPN Plus subscriber, and the reason I subscribed was UFC and the EFL. And Paramount Plus now has both UFC and it's had EFL for over a year. And I believe they do a much better job with the EFL than ESPN Plus did. ESPN Plus, you only ever saw championship games. The only time you saw a League One or a League Two game is in the weekends when championship was off because of FA Cup or something else. So the championship, there were no championship games. Then you would see League One games and League Two games. With the Paramount Plus coverage, you see championship games, but you also see a couple of League One and a couple of at least one League Two game every single week, and sometimes a couple League Two games. So I think they're doing a much, much better job with the EFL than ESPN Plus did. So I was just digesting that news this week when it comes out that WWE has signed a contract with ESPN's news service. This is not ESPN Plus, but a new service where all their premium live events are going to go to this new service. And this streaming service is starting at $29.99, which is 3 times probably what you were paying for Peacock or most other streaming services. But we are talking the Disney company, and the Disney company has a history of trying to charge more than any other streaming service, and they may get it. It's a great deal if you're a cable subscriber. So my generation is probably the last generation that's buying cable. You know, us and the boomers are probably the market for cable in the United States. My kids have never had cable, but that audience is dying off. I cut the cord in 2010. I have not had cable and will never have cable again, but I haven't had cable since 2010. But if you are a cable subscriber, you can get this new plus service that they're talking about, this add-on service. That content will all be free to you on the streaming service if you can indeed prove that you purchase cable and that you are an ESPN subscriber with that package. For everyone else that, lives in the 21st century and has cut the cord, you'll pay $29.99 if you want to watch these premium live events. And I say you because I most assuredly will not be paying $29.99 $99 for any premium live events, because the last two I barely watched any of the matches, and I think that that price point is absolutely ridiculous. Disney was a company 25, 30 years ago that couldn't do anything wrong, and I think over the last 10 years it has done very little right. Most of the franchises that they purchased, they managed to alienate the fans, and their pricing is ridiculous. Now, full disclosure, I am a Disney Plus subscriber and will be until my grandsons outgrow the channel. As long as they are interested in the things that are on that channel, I will be a Disney Plus subscriber. But they don't watch ESPN, and I'm not going to pay for this ridiculous cost for this service. So if you decide to do so, good on you, but I will not be joining you. So then that throws open what is going to happen with the WWE library. Is it going to stay on Peacock? If it stays on Peacock, I will probably keep the Peacock subscription. If the WWE library goes to YouTube, as they've talked about maybe happening, then I probably will let Peacock go. Although the one thing Peacock Peacock's negative is they just tried to raise their fee up $3 a month. The plus is they do have the Premier League. I do watch the game on NBC on Saturday, but with Peacock, you can watch almost every game every week. So that is in their favor. So to be determined whether I keep Peacock or not. Definitely will not be an ESPN, whatever they want to call this new premium service. And Disney Plus, your days are numbered. As soon as my grandsons outgrow your service, you're going bye-bye as well. The history topic this week I wanted to talk about was a match that when I first read about it puzzled me, and I'm still not sure that I have the answer yet this day, but I think I have an idea of what went on here. So on December 11th, 1916, Joe Stecher has been the American Heavyweight Wrestling Champion for about a year and a half, but he's actually recognized as the World Heavyweight Champion because the fans and newspaper reporters in the United States recognized him as the successor to Frank Gotch. Gotch, when he retired, there was a void from April of 1913 until Joe Stecher won the American Heavyweight Championship in the summer of 1915, where there was no recognized world champion. In 1916, the summer of 1916, Gotch and Stecher were going to work a match where Gotch was going to lose to Stecher, cementing him as the world champion, which he was already recognized as. And that would end all of these obnoxious challenges to Frank Gotch. From the moment he retired, everybody kept challenging him and wanting him to come out of retirement. And he wanted nothing to do with the ring anymore. He was pushing 40. And more importantly, he had gotten married in 1910 to Gladys Gotch, who was not a fan of Frank Gotch wrestling. She supported him, but he knew that she would rather he was not wrestling. And so there was pressure on him from the time he got married to retire. And he actually had flirted with retirement two or three times between 1910 and 1913 before he finally pulled the plug on his career at age 36 in April of 1913. Before the National Wrestling Alliance made changes to the rules in the 1950s, the World Championships could change hands through disqualifications or countout. And that was a cause for concern because if someone wanted to do a double cross, if they fixed the referee could always disqualify the champion and the title would go to the challenger. So on December 11th, 1916, Joe Stecher defends his championship against John F. Oland. Now, John F. Oland was born in Finland and had been a Greco-Roman wrestling participant in the 1912 Olympic Games. So Oland is a Greco-Roman wrestling specialist. Obviously, he's going to wrestle Joe Stecher in catch wrestling for the American or the World Championship. I'm confusing myself now. Joe Stecker is the recognized world champion, even though the match he won to become the recognized world champion was the American Heavyweight Wrestling Championship, for the American Heavyweight Wrestling Championship. But Joe Stecker is the recognized world champion at this time. They wrestle in Springfield, Massachusetts, which is the town that Olin became. That was his adopted hometown. So for the 15 or 20 years he was in the United States, Olin lived and wrestled out of Springfield, Massachusetts. It makes sense that Stecker would defend his title against Olin in his hometown because that would normally lead to a bigger gate. When I originally saw this match, my thought was that this match was going to be a work because of when it occurred in 1916. So the match that Stecker won to become the recognized world champion was a worked match with Charlie Cutler. Now, had Charlie Cutler tried to wrestle Stecker legitimately, Stecker would have beat him anyway. So it's not like he had a choice in the matter. Cutler was going to lose that title one way or the other. I originally thought this match was a work as well, but the more I look at it, the more that I'm starting to think that it was a contest with a weird ending and a potential double cross, not by Olin, but by the promoter. So the promoter in Springfield was a gentleman by the name of Jim Barnes. Well, we don't know he was a gentleman, but he was the promoter in Springfield, Massachusetts. And Barnes was promoting Olin, who is an Olympic competitor. He sees dollar signs in Olin. And Olin would achieve modest national success, but he would never achieve the level of fame that Joe Stecker did, or Earl Caddick, or Ed Strangler Lewis, or Vladek Zabisco, who were considered the big four around this time, or would be shortly after this. But Olin is no slouch. They have this match in December of 1916, and Barnes makes himself the referee. In some places, that would have reassured the champion, but you always had to be careful. If the promoter was the referee, the promoter is in an ideal position to double cross you if he wants to control the world title. The match, Stecker dominated the match. Olin basically was just wrestling defensively, but he was able to successfully withstand the leg scissors for 20 minutes and 14 minutes, respectively. This is one of the reasons I thought that this was a work, and maybe it still is, to put a leg scissors on somebody. So think back to the first segment in the show when I was talking about someone trying to use a or a triangle choke to take out his opponent in the MMA fight. If Stecker is holding this leg scissors on for 34 minutes of a match, then his legs are going to be completely burnt out. Now, if he had his legs around him like you would in a guard and he was trying to get him into position to squeeze him, but he wasn't really squeezing him or he was conserving his energy, then it's possible that you could do this for the times that they have listed there. But if he was trying to squeeze him that whole time, then we're back to this is more than likely a work. They wrestle for 2 hours, and they're one thing I neglected to say is they were not in a wrestling ring. They were on a platform on a mat, which was fairly common still. A lot of times the wrestling occurred on mats or carpets that were thrown on top of a stage. So local opera houses, places like that, were the venue a lot of times for professional wrestling matches because you could put the mat on the stage and they could wrestle on the stage and many of the spectators could still see them. So, as I said, after 2 hours of wrestling, Stecker and Olin roll off the platform. Olin surprises Stecker because they roll out. So they're. I don't think this was an orchestra pit, which was a common arrangement back then, but they're just on the side of the stage. Olin grabs Stecker by the wrist and base picks Stecker up and throws him over some chairs. That obvious foul should have led to his disqualification, but Jim Barnes, the promoter, took no action. So Stecker, who is surprised, I don't think Olin could have thrown him under normal circumstances, but Stecker's not expecting to be thrown when they're standing on the floor outside of the competition area. Stecker punches him. Olin punches back. So they trade punches for a few minutes. Well, a few minutes. They trade punches for 10 or 15 seconds and then stop fighting with each other, start to go back onto the mat. Olin gets on the mat first. Stecker is standing on the floor complaining to Barnes that he was thrown over these chairs and that Olin should be disqualified. Barnes says he's not going to disqualify him, nor is he going to disqualify both men for punching outside the ring or outside of the mat and to return to the mat. Stecker glares at Barnes for a few seconds, and then he turns around and he leaves the competition area. Now, under the rules, what Stecker did was a withdrawal because the match had started. In 1926, he did something similar when Paul Bowser tried to put Joe Malkowitz in a match with Stecker when Stecker was supposed to be wrestling Jake Bresler. The match hadn't started. Stecker left, and Bowser tried to say, well, he lost on a withdrawal, which no one really recognized other than the New York State Athletic Commission for about 5 minutes until they realized they were being duped. Because Stecker withdrew during the match, that could have resulted in his title going to Olin. And in fact, Barnes did award the match and the title to Olin on Stecker's withdrawal. Olin's manager, Helmer London, claimed the title based on this result. Olin's manager continued to make this spurious claim until Ed Strangler Lewis beat Olin in May of 1917. And then Lewis tried to claim he was the world champion for a while, but he dropped it as well because the newspaper reports didn't recognize either title as a title match or a title change. So Lewis's first title reign officially began when he beat Stecker in December 1920. The thing that makes me think that it was an attempted double cross by Barnes and possibly London, that Olin wanted no part of it, was Olin never claimed the world championship based on this match in this decision. London claimed it. Barnes claimed that Olin had won by the result of the match, but Olin never claimed that he was the world champion. And Stecker continued to defend the recognized world championship until he lost at Earl Caddock in 1917. And then Stecker takes the title back from Caddock at the beginning of 1920. And then Lewis takes the title from Stecker at the end of 1920. The match between Stecker and Earl Caddock in 1920 still exists. It's the oldest wrestling footage, they thought, the oldest wrestling film in existence, but now there is some wrestling footage. It might be of Alex Aberg from the 19 teens. I believe they've got, well, no, I don't believe, I know they have film footage of George Hackenschmidt that was just recently found, and that's from around 1909, 1910 time frame. So there are older wrestling films now available, but for a long time, Stecker versus Caddock, they thought was the oldest wrestling film in existence. Let me know whether you think this was a double cross or not. I think it was a contest because of the long, boring, and inconclusive. And remember, I always say boring and inconclusive have got to be part of because long could just be they're dragging out the match for the purposes of increasing the gambling and the betting. There was nothing in the coverage of this match where they even talked that much about betting. So I don't know how much gambling went on when it came to this particular match. But it's just an odd little match. You never hear about it when people are talking about Stecker's history. You never hear about this disputed title match or this possible title change. There's a few online sources that make reference to it. I think most of them came to the conclusion it was a double cross by Barnes. I think that most people think it, or most of the sources I've seen think it's a work. I think it actually might have been a contest now. The problem is we're all supposing, based on our knowledge of what went on back then and what we're reading and what we're seeing, but none of us know. Like we know that the 1925 match between Stanislaus Zbyszko and Big Wayne Munn was a double cross because of the result, because of the results afterwards, because of all the things that everybody said. That's pretty well documented that that was a double cross. I believe the second Gotch, and so does Mike Chapman, the second Gotch versus Hackenschmidt match was a contest that Hackenschmidt did his absolute best in for the first fall, but by the end of the first fall, he was done because of the knee injury. It was just too much for him to overcome. There are other historians that firmly believe that that match was a work. Who's right and who's wrong, we'll never know. We can just give you our opinion based on what we've seen, what we've studied, and what we know that's going on at that time frame. Opinion on this match is that Stecker and Olin wrestled a contest. There were still contests that went on. In fact, Stecker wrestled a couple more contests with Ed Strangler Lewis, 3 more after this match. So it was a contest and an attempted double cross by the promoter, which I do not believe that Olin was a part of. I don't think he knew about it until after it occurred. I think him and Stecker just lost their temper because Stecker was constantly attacking, and I think he was frustrated that Olin was successfully defending. And I think Olin was frustrated that he could not get any offense on Stecker at all. I think he thought at some point he would wear Stecker down, and Stecker wasn't wearing down. So I think the frustration outside the ring led them, to Olin, to do something that should have been an obvious disqualification for both men to have a fist fight, and then for Barnes to see his opportunity. Barnes was going to try to do a double cross at some point if Olin couldn't beat Stecker, and I think that that was his opportunity to do so. My recommendation for this week, I've got two because one is going to be a future review. It will not be next week. So next week, I believe, well, I know I'm going to have Trey for sure in the studio and hopefully Caleb as well. And we're finally going to do the long awaited review of the Central States All Star Wrestling from April 5th, 1986. If both boys were children, I could probably be prosecuted as an abusive parent for making them watch this, but as they're both adults, I had to watch this garbage, so I think that they should have to watch it too. Now, when I say that they are going to have to watch this garbage, on this show, you had Harley Race and Butch Reed. So you had some talented wrestlers on there. But this was a show of homesteaders pretty much, and we're going to get into that in the next episode. So the next episode, I will be joined by one or both of my sons, and we are going to review the Central States card. But we are going to review The Wrestler, the 1974 film that Vern Gagne was involved in, and Billy Robinson. I have seen a handful of clips, but I have never seen this movie. I don't think I've seen more than 5 or 10 minutes of this film. So this will actually be the first time I have ever watched this film. And that will probably be the review for the second episode in September. And then my recommendation for a match this week is the Mighty Atlas versus Angelo Poffo from Chicago, Illinois in 1956. Now, the Mighty Atlas was a big star in Chicago in the 1950s. Morris Shapiro was his name. And he's one of the early muscle men bodybuilders. He had a very good physique. Morris Shapiro, the Mighty Atlas, huge star in Fred Kohler's Chicago promotion in the 1950s, and normally a heel. He is normally the bad guy battling the Vern Gagnes, but in this match, he is actually a babyface. And the reason he is a babyface is he is wrestling someone more unpopular than he is, and that is Angelo Poffo, none other than the father of Randy Macho Man Savage, whose real name is Randy Poffo, and his younger brother, Leaping Lanny Poffo. So Angelo Poffo, the patriarch of the family, while Angelo Poffo held the world sit-up record for a while for I think most sit-ups in an hour. In this match, it's actually the Mighty Atlas who is doing the Power Man moves to escape the offense of Angelo Poffo. There are times when these matches will really slow down and they will hold a headlock for a few minutes to try to bring the crowd down before, they get to the finish of the match. So this match moved at a good enough pace that I thought it was an interesting match. And I do like the heel versus heel concept. I think I've talked about in the past, and if I haven't, we'll talk about it in a future episode. One of my favorite matches from this era, it's from the Chicago area as well, and it's Dick the Bruiser, who was always a heel in Chicago, versus the Big O, Bob Orton Sr. And Bob Orton Sr. is also a very famous heel at this time, but just like in the Mighty Atlas versus Angelo Poffo match, the Big O, Barry or Bob Orton Sr. I said Barry Orton, who was his son. Bob Orton Sr. is the face, the person that the fans cheer for, just because they despise Dick the Bruiser so much. So we'll talk about that one in the future too. But those are my recommendations this week. The Wrestler, it's available on YouTube, and the Mighty Atlas versus Angelo Poffo from Chicago in 1956, also available on YouTube. And now we get to the review, and this is a movie I had said a few weeks ago we would be reviewing, and it is The Mad Bull from 1977. And this is a made for TV movie, and to be honest, I don't know what generated the interest from a television production standpoint where they would decide to make a TV movie about professional wrestling. Professional wrestling was really popular in the 70s, but it was popular on a local level. There was not a whole lot of national attention on professional wrestling in the 70s because it was a territorial thing. The Los Angeles promotion, where most television and movie companies were based, was in its dying days. So it was getting ready to die off. So I'm struggling to see what generated the interest where they decided to do the Mad Bull. I understand the Wrestler because Vern Gagne and some people put money behind it because they wanted to make a wrestling movie on professional wrestling that they thought would generate interest in the sport. Mad Bull because one, it exposes the work nature of the business from the very beginning, and because LA was dying at the time, where you would see in later years when it became more popular that you would see that crossover where there would be movies about professional wrestling and where there would be movies starring professional wrestlers. And one of my things about the Mad Bull is there is a serious lack of professional wrestlers other than Mike Mazurki and Hardboiled Haggerty. Alex Karras had a short career in professional wrestling, and he plays the main character of the film, the Mad Bull, who is a heel but is really a nice guy who cares about his family and has a son, and that he's just gone through a divorce with his wife, and trying to navigate the relationship with his son after his marriage broke up. And the bad guy is the bad guy in the film is actually the second bad guy. One guy's trying to kill him, so he's absolutely the worst. But the good guy wrestler in the film, the babyface, is really a heel behind the scenes, and his name is Jack the White Knight Braden, and he's played by Steve Sandor, who I don't believe had any professional wrestling background, but played a lot of bodybuilders in that back in the 1970s. Back in the 1970s, if you had a role that called for somebody who was supposed to be a bodybuilder or a weightlifter, Steve Sandor, who I believe was a football player, often got those roles. And while he has a good physique, it would not be anything special in the 80s or the 90s. But in the 1970s, and it was only pretty much him and Bill Smith who were running around with pretty good physiques. Now, Arnold had done two or three films by then, but he hadn't broken through into stardom yet. Pumping Iron was 77. So it's only around this time where the really great bodybuilding physiques are starting to come out. And one of the things about this is Sandor he was 40 when this film was made. What I thought were strengths of the movie, it was a good representation of how dangerous fans could be during the kayfabe era. So one of the plot lines going through this whole film is the Mad Bull, who is the heel, has enraged this fan who obviously has mental health issues and who is trying to kill him and ends up running him off the road, shoots his brother on accident instead of him, and then tries to shoot him again at the end of the film. Well, I should say, if you have not watched this film, you better stop because you're going to get some spoilers. He does shoot the Mad Bull at the end. The weaknesses I already touched on a little bit. Lack of professional wrestlers other than Mike Mazurki, who played a gym owner because at this point in time he was long, long, long into his career. He must have been in his 70s or 80s. And Hardboiled Haggerty, who makes an appearance in many films in the 70s and 80s as a bad guy a lot of times. And the other thing about this movie that I wasn't real crazy about was the improbable ending. And actually, before I get into the improbable ending, I should talk about the beginning of the movie and what sets up Braden as more the bad guy and the Mad Bull is the good guy. Is Braden and Mr. Clean, who's played by Hardboiled Haggerty, are wrestling the Mad Bull and the Executioner. And the Executioner is actually the younger brother of the Mad Bull. Braden intentionally breaks his arm to start this film and to set himself up as the bad guy, even though in the storyline in wrestling, he's the good guy. And while I would like to say that if you did that today, you'd be run out of the business. If you did that today, you'd be run out of the business if you were an up and comer, if you were not the top guy. This Braden was the top guy in this promotion. So could the top guy in the promotion get away with stuff? Yes, he's going to get away with a lot more, and he might be able to injure his opponents. I mean, Buddy Rogers, the reason Bruno Sammartino hated him is when Bruno Sammartino was an up and comer before they ever wrestled for his world title. And Buddy might have been the world champion already, or he was getting ready to have his run with the world champion as the world champion, but I don't think he was the world champion yet. I just think he was a big star up in that area. Bruno had given him his body, for a body slam, and instead Buddy dumped him out of the ring head first over the top rope. And Bruno said if he hadn't grabbed the rope and turned himself a little bit, he'd have come right down on his head and broken his neck. So top guys got away with stuff that you wouldn't normally get away with. Would a top guy today get away with deliberately injuring a fellow wrestler? Probably not, but it probably wouldn't be the promotion that came down on him. It would probably be the opponent he hurt on purpose suing him successfully in a court of law. But that's how the movie starts out. So you're feeling sympathy for this nice guy and his brother, who this big star is uh, taken advantage of. And then you see the personal life behind the character and what it's cost him. One of the things I did like about the movie was it did show how people look down on professional wrestling, professional wrestlers, and they look down on professional wrestling fans. If you told someone in the 1980s that you liked professional wrestling, They thought you were some kind of lunatic with about two brain cells. It was not something that society really smiled on or thought was worthwhile. Today, nobody thinks anything about it, but back then, it was you were kind of ridiculed if you liked professional wrestling. I did like the fact that they showed how the fans could get way too excited about the action. And let's face it, even today, when everybody knows that it's a work, there are still fans that every once in a while charge the ring, attack the wrestlers, but it's much rarer. When I was going to the matches in St. Louis, even St. Louis, which was a pretty tame crowd, there was no heel that was going to go through the fans and not think that he was going to get attacked or stabbed or, something bad was going to happen if he went out amongst the fans. And Tracy Walter, who's a character actor starting in the 1970s, who you've probably seen in dozens of films and was 30 years old when this film was made, does an outstanding job playing the fan that gets way too caught up in the sport. And he's also the quiet one that they tell you should always be worried about. He does a great job in that role. The other thing you might be surprised about is that lovable old coach from Cheers plays the shady promoter Duke Sallow in this TV movie. But let me get to the thing that I had the most problem with, and that is the improbable ending. First of all, this movie had the most feckless police officers I have ever seen. You have somebody shot outside of the arena, and his brother doesn't want to really talk to you, and you let him blow you off. That's not like they didn't show the urgency of the investigation that would be going on and how they would be trying to beef up security around the wrestler involved and all that. He just basically says, I don't want to talk about it. And the police officer's like, oh, okay. And then the day of the big match between the Mad Bull and the White Knight, Jack Braden, there's no really additional security. This crazy fan that's already run him off the road once and shot his brother, thinking he was shooting the Mad Bull, is able to approach him in the arena, pull a gun, and shoot at him before a security officer. There's no extra police around. A security officer takes one shot at the guy who takes off running. And it's actually the wrestlers who catch the guy, turn his truck over, and make sure he gets arrested. But my favorite part of the whole thing is the Mad Bull has liked this girl, but who is kind of put off by the fact that he's a professional wrestler, but eventually realizes she has stronger feelings for him than she does about her misgivings about his profession. So she goes down to the arena when she realizes that the Mad Bull and Jack Braden are wrestling for real in this match, which is another part of this improbable ending. The film is built around him finding himself and wrestling this guy for real and beating him, and his dad training him for that. But that is not as even as improbable as the way this film is. So the crazy fan shoots at him. The other wrestlers chase him down. They make sure he's arrested. So at the end of the film, here comes the Mad Bull, who has been shot in the shoulder. It's just a flesh wound. It's just a flesh wound. Doesn't go to the hospital. There's no police around to take a statement from him. They don't demand that he goes to the hospital and be treated and have the bullet removed from his shoulder if he has a bullet in his shoulder. He comes walking out holding his arm with an obvious bullet wound in his shoulder and goes to his car, and there is his girlfriend sitting in the front seat. And she's like, what happens? Oh, it's no big deal, whatever. He throws his bag back in the back seat. They talk for a second and they drive off into the sunset. Well, that would be a great ending for the film. They should be driving off into the sunset when she's waiting for him outside of the hospital or inside the hospital and he's being treated for his gunshot wound. But, it's just a flesh wound, nothing to see here. Just move along. Uh, this was not a great movie, but you wouldn't expect a TV movie about professional wrestling from the 1970s to be a great movie. It's a movie for wrestling fans, and if you're not a wrestling fan, you're probably not going to enjoy this film at all. It definitely had some parts in it that were pretty good, but if you were rating a film out of 4 stars, you'd give it 2 stars, and you'd probably be being pretty generous. It's not a cinematic masterpiece on any level. I hope you enjoyed this week's show. Next week, as I said, Trey, at least, and probably Caleb are going to be joining me. And the history topic, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Collar and Elbow group because they were definitely working. I found some of the matches that they were uh, involved in. The thing is, I just don't know. It's not readily apparent because of the names that are involved if Henry Hill was involved in all of the collar and elbow working matches around the U.S. at this time, or if it was only the ones that took place in New York and near his establishment, or where he was the referee. So that needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. So that's it for this episode of It Was Almost Real, the Pro Wrestling History Podcast. KenZimmermanJr.com is the place to check out the show notes for today's episode. You can view the show notes for this episode at KenZimmermanJr.com, episode 98. You could also view the show notes for any episode at that website. That's also the place where you can see what I'm working on. And there's a significant there's a significant group of posts on professional wrestling history, uh, boxing history, martial arts, and St. Louis history. If you're interested in digging deeper into this area of professional wrestling, that's the resource I would suggest. Thank you for listening today. I would also be grateful if you would rate this podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to the show. That helps tremendously with keeping the podcast visible so people who have never heard of it can discover it. And if you've already done this, thank you so much. If you would like to comment on this episode or ask a question, please go to KenZimmermanJr.com, find the contact page at the top navigation, and drop me an email. I have a new email now. It is ken@KenZimmermanJr.com. The old one was longer, and I've shortened it with the new web host. I would love to hear from you. And until next time, take care, everybody. Bye bye.